Hello, my name is Michelle Ruiz. I use the pronouns she, her, ella, and I am the program coordinator at the US Latinx Art Forum. As we begin this event, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge and honor our ancestral grounds and support Indigenous peoples' ongoing stewardship and struggles to protect their cultural resources and homelands. I am currently broadcasting from my home in Berwyn, which is on the traditional unceded territory of the Council of Three Fires, the Ojibwe, Ottawa, and Potawatomi tribes. The US Latinx Art Forum champions artists and arts professionals through initiatives that advance the vitality of Latinx art and foster an intergenerational network that spans academia, art institutions, and collections. In 2021, we partnered with the Mellon Foundation, the Ford Foundation, and the New York Foundation for the Arts to administer the Latinx Artist Fellowship. This fellowship awards $50,000 in unrestricted funds to each member of a multi-generational cohort of 15 visual artists each year for an initial commitment of 5 years. It is our first significant prize of its kind and celebrates the plurality and diversity of Latinx artists and aesthetics. It is designed to address the systemic and long-standing lack of philanthropic and institutional support for Latinx artists, and we are honored to be a partner for this groundbreaking initiative. It is my pleasure to welcome you to XS Intersection, Shaping Worlds. We are thrilled that you have joined us. Today's event marks the start of our 2023-2024 XS Intersection series, which gathers our third cohort of fellows into conversation with curators and USLAF members who share a sustained commitment to Latinx art. We plan to close our event with a Q&A facilitated by our moderators, and we invite you to submit your questions using the Q&A function below. It is my pleasure to introduce our co-hosts for this conversation, Marcela Guerrero, the DeMartini family curator of the Whitney Museum of American Art in New York City, and Mary Thomas, director of programs at the US Latinx Art Forum.
Thank you, Michelle. Hola a todos. Good afternoon and welcome everyone. My name is Marcela Guerrero and I use pronouns she, her, ella. I want to acknowledge that the Whitney Museum is located on the lands of the Lenape people. As a result of centuries of colonialism, today the Lenape are dispersed throughout the US and Canada. Alongside the Lenape, many other Indigenous nations have ancestral ties to this place now known as New York, including the 6 Haudenosaunee nations, Seneca, Cayuga, Tuscarora, Mohawk, Oneida, and Onondaga, as well as the Shinnecook and Puspatak. We honor their ongoing connection to this place. To those joining us online, please take a moment to identify and recognize the Indigenous people who have always and continue to steward the land from where you're joining us.
Hello, everyone. I'm Mary Thomas, and my pronouns are she, her, ella. It is such a pleasure to welcome you this afternoon. I am speaking with you from Minneapolis, Minnesota, which is sacred land that has been stewarded by the Dakota Oyate for millennia and was unfairly ceded in the treaties of 1837 and 1851. Marcela and I would like to welcome you all to Shaping Worlds, the first of 4 virtual panels in this third year of the X as Intersection public lecture series. These panels are a great opportunity to tease out the common threads found among this year's cohort of the Latinx Artist Fellowship, and an excellent way to learn more about key issues in contemporary Latinx art. It fills us with tremendous joy and pride to be in fellowship with today's audience and the artists with whom we'll be in conversation: Margarita Cabrera, Beatriz Cortez, and the artist collective Postcommodity. The artists we'll speak with today create work that spans years-long collaborations, speculative histories, and the recuperation of Indigenous worldviews. Their work is complex, drawing upon layered histories and contexts that encourages close attention and invites close engagement. In other words, they each deserve an artist talk, but for today, we have invited them to share a window into their engagement with constructed and natural environments. In today's conversation, we will explore the ways contemporary sculpture can critique political forces at play in society, and how the process of shaping worlds is one of co-creation that takes place alongside communities, ancestors, and the environment we reside within. I will now turn it over to Marcela to introduce our panelists this afternoon.
I will read a brief introduction on each artist, but please check out their websites or follow them on their social media channels. Margarita Cabrera was born in Monterrey, Mexico, and moved to El Paso, Texas at the age of 10. Her work centers around socio-political community issues, including cultural identity, migration, violence, inclusivity, labor, and empowerment. Cabrera creates sculptures made out of mediums ranging from steel, copper, wood, ceramics, and fibers, and often employs a collaborative process that references the rich traditions of Indigenous Mexican textiles and pays homage to the collective labor of women. Beatriz Cortez was born in San Salvador, El Salvador, and lives and works in Los Angeles. Cortez's work explores simultaneity, life in different temporalities and different versions of modernity, particularly in relation to memory and loss in the aftermath of war, and the experience of migration, and in relation to imagining possible futures. Postcommodity is an interdisciplinary art collective comprised of Cristóbal Martínez, Genízaro Manto Chicano, and Kade L. Cherokee. Postcommodity's Indigenous lens and voice forge new metaphors capable of rationalizing our shared experiences within this increasingly challenging contemporary environment, promote a constructive discourse that challenges the social, political, and economic processes that are destabilizing communities and geographies, and connect Indigenous narratives of cultural self-determination with a broader public sphere. To fully understand the rich practice of each of these artists would require hours of conversation and close observation of their works. Instead, the purpose of today's panel is to look at one specific angle of their practice and to spark the interest in you to learn more. We encourage questions, provocations, and any other way in which you want to express generosity toward the artists or the themes here discussed. While the ideas articulated this evening will undoubtedly be personal and profound, we welcome a casual atmosphere where curiosity prevails. With that said, I will hand it over to Mary. She and I will pose questions to each of the artists, and afterwards, the artists will have about 10 minutes to be in conversation with each other and with us, the moderators. We have devised this segment of the panel as an opportunity for the artists to be in, and I quote, community of interest, activity, feeling, or experience, the true definition of a fellowship, and to explore the points of contact between them. We have reserved 5 to 10 minutes at the end for questions from the audience. Feel free to submit your questions throughout the talk. You don't have to wait until the last minute. And let us know if you have any technical difficulties. We will do our best to help you. And now I'll invite Mary and Margarita to join.
Thank you, Marcela. Margarita, it's a pleasure to be in conversation with you this afternoon. And to start, I'd like to ask you, as an artist who engages in long-term collaborations and the co-creation of artworks within a landscape that has been scarred by the imposition of borders and resulting histories of violence and repression, how do you give form to the stories embedded within the land and that belong to the communities who reside there?
Hello, everybody. Can you see me?
I can see you.
Okay. Hi there. Saludos, everyone. I'm really honored to be here in conversation with everyone today. I want to thank the Latinx Artist Fellows for this wonderful opportunity. So how do I give form to stories embedded in the land? As a community artist, my goal has always been to give shapes to new forms using various materials and technologies, and to consider the community as a main medium of this process. So shaping relationships and new ways of seeing and new ways of being. The community projects are usually in three parts: the storytelling and the workshops, and then come the exhibitions and the cultural dialogues and community presentations. So the shaping and the forming begins with the ideation and the inception of conversations and strategizing with partners and community leaders, getting all the approvals for design, for engineer, construction plans, etc. And then come the shaping of community relations, forming a sense of commitment, a sense of trust that can lead to a good environment for story sharing. And then we give form to symbols that represent the stories that are shared by the participants. So after the story sharing and after the creation of symbols, we move on to the construction of the actual physical works. And then I, at that point, take the role of the artist educator, and I'm leading a group of people, usually folks that are making art for the first time. So it's, I put the role of the artist educator, like I'm working with students, and teaching basic clay building techniques or basic cloth forming techniques, and working with a group of people that are eager and grateful to exercise the human right of expression, right, which is the opportunity to make art. And not only that, but to also be active members within their cultural communities. So the shapes of these artworks are always very mesmerizing in the exhibition spaces, and they have a very strong collective presence. But I will say that indispensably, the success of the work truly is more based on the more social structural shapes and forms that result at the end of a project, or any given community project, right? And I'm talking about shapes like, the formation and acknowledgement of inclusion of immigrant communities in a museum exhibit, the shaping of new relationships and opportunities for immigrant communities, the forming of new artists in the community, shaping new histories, and creating new scholarship opportunities through the collections and acquisitions of this kind of work, shaping new, more inclusive futures, really. And those are the most important shapes and forms that I consider as part of my work.
Thank you. And something that, is so really striking about your work is the way that it engages with the US-Mexico border, especially as a site where healing is possible. I'd love to know about the way that you approach this as an embodied practice, whether through sound, working with embroidery, and materials like repurposed Border Patrol uniforms.
Yes, thank you for that question. And yeah, for example, in the Space in Between project, maybe we can move to the next slide. That is an installation where at the center stage is the Space in Between project and the Pepita para el Oro, para que hable o calle. And the Space in Between work and the birds and the parrots are in the gallery are meant to be a very haptic experience for the viewer. So the public has an understanding of the work through their own bodily sensory, right? Throughout the work, there's symbols of the work that are very, very strong, and they represent bodies, right? So you have the geographical body, you have the cactus body, you have the uprooted immigrant body, you have the Border Patrol officer represented as a body, and then you have the collective body, right, of all the works and the people represented. But beyond the symbolic,
Pero más allá de los
excuse me, beyond the symbolic symbol of the body, the body also functions as a tool to create healing through self-awareness, through mindfulness, through acceptance. The body creates a sense of belonging and self-responsibility. And in this work, it's important to pay attention to the main material that's being transformed here, and that's the Border Patrol uniform, which to some in American society, the material represents safety, security, control, power, but to others, it represents something totally different, such as uprootedness, violence, family separation, and even death. And the idea here is to bring these opposing communities with different perspectives to enter into a common dialogue and work together to deconstruct and transform this uniform material into shapes that represent new bodies, right? Shapes that represent growth, that represent flourishment, that represent nature and life. So there is a kind of embodiment in the physical qualities of the work. They're also visible through the manual labor of its making. And it's very important to the work's significance. For example, there are very anthropomorphic soft sculptures that seem to be losing structure. They are presented like, strings like hair, and there are forms that are made up of exhausted, cut up shapes, for instance. There's also to share a poignant and embodied moment in this process. It's a moment when a participant who has been uprooted transforms a uniform and fabric that represents the body of an oppressor and makes art with it. It's a very healing moment of justice. Another example of embodiment in the gallery, I would say, are the Pepita para el Loro parrots that are the robotic, they represent the robotic responses within the space. So the parrots are Pepita para el Loro, para que hable o calle, means a nugget for the bird to speak or be quiet. And basically they are birds that complement the experience of the Space in Between project pieces and engage the viewer more actively. The parrots are meant to represent Mexican parrots that are at risk of extinction due to their trade in the pet industry. And they're sewn by hand, and they have inside of them a mimicry device that engages the audience responses. So if you speak to the bird in the gallery, that bird will echo back what you say and will transmit the word that you, or the phrase that you share throughout the gallery space. And so, there's this kind of chaotic, robotic, mechanical dialogue that's taking place, which, there's humor and there's this kind of playfulness in the work that's meant to be very critical of our community's complacency to the dehumanizing of the US government towards our immigrant communities. And so this kind of like chaos, right, this robotic and chaos is reflective of this complacency, but also of the media using misinformation as truth for political gain, for instance. And so the work is very politicized within the gallery, and it offers a contemplation for diverse audiences to interpret, these issues and these spaces from a different place of wisdom and a different place of knowledge, right, through a more diverse perspective. This, the work has long-term impact on the community participating and those who are supporting this kind of work. So when people are confronted with these pieces, public, for instance, becomes a testament to the extraordinary strength and the resilience and the survival of immigrant communities. And this testament in turn then creates empathy, right? And inspires kindness, which we know has tremendous positive impacts on our body's immunities and cardiovascular health, actually. And so not only do the people involved in the act of giving and receiving kindness benefit, but also those that are observing, right? So these acts of kindness encourage people to repeat good deeds, right? So it's amazing how our bodies can resonate and heal, with creative kindness. And I think this is an example of that.
Absolutely. And in our last couple of moments together, I'd love to talk about how your work and a persistent through line in it is an emphasis on dialogue. And specifically, how we often assume that dialogue takes place within a community, but that you demonstrate this capacity to be in dialogue with the landscape as well. And I'm curious to hear what it means in your practice to be in dialogue with the landscape, especially in light of histories of extractive practices of the landscape that humans have committed.
Yes. Thank you for that question. I will say that whether the work represents the land or land is used to create the artwork, the artistic dialogue really is about the memory of the land and the healing qualities and transformative qualities that it embodies. For example, in the next slide, if you could turn to that, the Longmont Community Project, which is, center stage on the images there, is a community project which centers on art and issues of food accessibility. And it's a project that was sponsored by the BMOCA Museum, Longmont Museum of Art. It's an exhibition, Agriculture, which invited farmers and artists to collaborate and inspire the thinking of more ethical relationship to food and a relationship to land and each other. And I was paired up with the Olin Farms from Boulder, Colorado. And the project was inspired by the parable of the long spoons, which is, I'll quickly tell you the story, about people sitting around a table with a pot of hearty stew, warm food, each with very long spoons. And although they have a spoon to reach the food in the middle of the table with their long spoon, the length makes it impossible for them to reach the food to their own mouths, and therefore they're starving. So until they realize that the spoon can reach the person across the table and they can then feed each other, then, they're all saved. And they go to heaven. This is an old Jewish story. But the message is nourishing others is a way of nourishing ourselves, right? Which pairs up beautifully with the values and the spirit of the Olin Farms. The thinking about work in dialogue with the land. I also want to share that farm experience paired up with an art experience was incredible. The Olin Farms taught us the understanding of our land and care for it, learning about regeneration of agriculture and increasing diversity and health of ecosystems. Most importantly, we learned that the soil determines the health of everything that grows out of it, including food and including communities, right? So the experience, working with the farm was not only educational, but undoubtedly is going to transform the way in which all of us who came in contact with the work relate to the land and the world around us, right? It's a very spiritual, communal experience. And all of this led to the creation of the spoons, which you see in the main slide, and you see the workshop images on the right. And you can see that the installation looks amazing with these incredible sculptures that depict community stories. Everything is handmade with community participation and sharing of stories that relate to the land, right? But I just want to mention quickly that the most important part of the CARE project is to come in the future, and that is a community feast dialogue where folks around the Longmont community who are working to advance food accessibility, they will be invited to a performance and a feast where guests will feed each other while participating in a conversation that centers on the specific themes related to food accessibility, right? Like soil regeneration again, like food deserts, extractivist farming, and environmental racism, and more. And I have other stories to share, but I know we don't have much more time, so I can stop there with this slide.
Thank you so much, Margarita. And what a poignant note to end on in anticipation of the next phase of this project. At this time, it's a pleasure to invite Beatriz Cortez to join me on the virtual stage.
Buenas tardes.
Buenas tardes. Beatriz, it's a pleasure to be in conversation. And in thinking about your work, I was really struck by the fact that it offers this generative invitation to shift away from an anthropocentric construction of time and to foreground nonlinear temporalities and expansive timescales, such as those of the Earth and geological formations. I'd like to ask you, how do you approach this expansive notion of time and the absences that are inherent to it in order to create a work that has a tangible presence and a sense of immediacy?
Thank you, Mary. I want to begin by saying that it's a pleasure to be here and to share this space with these artists that I admire so much, Margarita and Postcommodity, Kade, and also Cristóbal. And I'm so glad to be in this conversation with you and with Marcela and with Michelle. So thank you so much. Well, to answer your question, I think that slowly time became a central element in my work, and I think it changed everything because I began to see each image and each object as time travelers and as containers of multiple temporalities and of moments that happen without humans being present, and for things to exist not for humans, and that became so beautiful. And so to think of these multiple temporalities also dismantles the logic of modernity and the logic of borders, and artwork. And I love that. I love that the sculptures then exist and take a place within the art world, and at the same time, they speak of other temporalities beyond our own and enter other spaces that are future, that haven't happened, and in some way will futures to happen, speak of our desire, like Margarita was saying, our desire for generosity, as a way to construct futures, etc.
Fantastic. And I was curious, could you share a little about the piece that we're looking at in the slide?
Yes, this is Ilopango, the volcano that left at Storm King Art Center in New York by the Hudson. And it was inspired by a volcanic eruption that happened in what is now El Salvador. But before El Salvador existed, El Salvador, like the United States, is only 200 years old, you know. So many things have happened in the world and in the universe before our countries even began to exist. And in that place of the earth, at the center of the earth, where now we see the tropics flourishing, there was a volcanic eruption that was massive and that impacted the whole world and darkened the sun for about 18 months. And that spread particles from the underworld, which became a symbol of birth and part of the story of creation for many of the indigenous communities that emerged in Mesoamerica, and what we call Mesoamerica. And so the underworld then, as a symbol of what's under the earth, which calls our attention to the underground rivers that flow, the lava that flows between where I am in Los Angeles right now and that land, etc. All these particles went flying in the atmosphere and took a long time to land. When they darkened the sun that year, there was no summer, it was all winter. Many people died because the crops didn't make it, etc. But at the same time, those particles spread the particles of the underworld everywhere. And so to me, the first thing that struck me about this story, which I came back to it during the pandemic because there was a scholar who found particles of this volcano in Iceland and was able to demonstrate that the volcanic eruption had taken these particles to Antarctica and to the Arctic and all over the planet. And I began to think how immigrants, as they're crossing the border, are standing on their own land, no matter where they are. And that was super beautiful way to look at the landscape as part of other temporalities. And so this volcano, this sculpture, which is also itself a traveler, was made in France and then in my studio in Los Angeles. And at Storm King is going to also travel over the Hudson River to the MPAC, which is at the Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. And it's going to travel over a boat on the Hudson in this symbolic gesture that continues invoking the movement of land and the movement of the landscape and the transformation of the planet in temporalities that we are unable to detect with our short lifespan. And so then it's going to be installed inside the concert hall at the MPAC, and it will take another life and speak about the sound that objects emanate and carry with them as memories of their own different temporalities and transformations.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And something that I think is really resonant in this piece is that there's a rethinking of notions of permanence. And, you know, your work addresses the movements of cultural objects, of natural materials, of people across time and space. And as you said, there's a transformation that takes place. And I'd love to know more about how the traces of those migrations and transformations are inscribed in other projects you've done as well.
Thank you for that question, Mary. I think that has been really important in my work, but I think when one time I was installing my work in Marfa, at Ballroom Marfa, and I remember that I saw the idea of permanence in the art world there, which also exists at Storm King, the idea that, for example, Judd's works were installed in a certain way, thinking about the light, etc. And I was struck by the idea that Judd believed in the permanence of the light hitting always this landscape in the same way over the years. And I thought a lot about that optimism, you know, and I thought a lot about the fact that at that time when Judd was installing those works, Marfa was probably not yet, or not in this way, in the symbolic way, one of the headquarters of the Border Patrol. But, you know, for me, installing those works that I was installing in conversation with Chamberlain, with Judd, with the Border Patrol, with the Chinati Foundation, with the border itself, was important in terms of thinking about impermanence as movement, as a way of always being on the go, as always becoming And when I installed this volcano at Storm King, that question came back to my mind. And I think it has become really important because I'm trying to not desire permanence as my goal in life. I'm trying to not desire permanence for a monument or for a sculpture. I'm trying to desire becoming, transformation, movement, and to engage in the experiences and conversations that that movement also brings to the lives that we live as human beings, but also that the planet lives, and that the animals and the plants experience as well as migrants that they are.
Thank you so much. And you know, I'd love if we could look at an additional image showing the way that, you know, we see this transcription inscribed on another work of yours. And
Yes,
oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Mary.
Oh, well, I was going to shift to ask about how you're thinking about reinscribing the landscape through materials, but you know, before we closed with that question, if you wanted to share anything about this piece, you know, please feel, you know, I think we'd all love to hear about it.
Yeah, no, I wanted to say that this piece, Stella Z, which is a piece made after Quiriguá, meaning that after one of the stelas that were found in the site of Quiriguá that were made by the ancient Maya. Contrary Warrior is a work that speaks about temporalities, and also it's an effort to make a critique of linearity of chronologies, because they are Darwinian and because they represent in that narrative of Darwinian chronologies, indigenous peoples are always placed in the back as if they were part of the past and not part of the future. And, you know, like the Zapatista said, we want to imagine a world that's where there's room for everybody. And that's part of the effort. And so in this stela, there's an inscription of temporalities, of the travels of the sculpture that's next to it, and of the sculpture itself that we're looking at. And in this narrative of the temporalities, which you can see in some of the details here, there's the movement of there's the eruption of the volcano and the movement of the sculpture over a shipping container crossing the Atlantic, arriving to the port of Los Angeles, where there's all these shipping containers and a bridge, and then getting to my studio, where there's our gate, which says Building 5, and then being installed at Storm King. And so when I made this sculpture, all the things that are happening there had not happened yet. And now it is already installed at Storm King. So half of the stela has moved from the future towards the past, but the other half hasn't happened yet. The travels of the volcano over the Hudson River and its arrival to the MPAC, as well as the last part of the stela, which has not been inscribed yet, in an effort to evoke the idea that the future is open. And so this piece then, you know, is a reference to how we can also imagine temporalities in abstract ways, and we can insert our hands into narrating the past again in other ways, and narrating the future, and thinking of the movement of time in different directions, in multiplicities, etc. So that's what this work is about. But with regards to the next slide, that work is at my solo show at the Williams College Museum of Art, which is up right now, and our opening celebration will take place next week on September 21st. This show is called The Portals, and it engages with the histories of the Williams College as a symbol of our national histories and our histories with education, with access to education, a conversation about the many people that fight for justice in a space in different temporalities, even if some of the exclusions continue to exist, etc. And when I visited Williams College and I was planning to make this exhibition, there was an initiative by the Stockbridge Muncie community, but also by the students that said these are Mohican homelands. There were banners everywhere. Different houses had their picket sign, you know, and it was beautiful to me. And I had heard that the regulations at Williams College only allow banners to be up for 1 week. And so I decided to invite the Stockbridge Muncie community to amplify their message in those flyers through my work, which has actually was going to be installed for 9 months, but it's going to be there for 12 months. And so this message, which was a collaboration with the Stockbridge Muncie Community Language Program, and I'm very grateful to them, and also to Lisa Doran, who the curator of the exhibition, who has been also in contact with them, and they recorded the language, the Mohican language, this phrase which says, "This we are standing on Mohican homelands," and I would like to play it for you all. It's also a celebration of the survival of the language, of the ways in which indigenous peoples mark the land in non-permanent ways, in ways that celebrate impermanence because celebrate movement. And survival is about movement. And the Stockbridge Muncie communities were displaced from where Williams College is. Most of them are in Delaware and in other locations. But, you know, they continue to survive as they have moved to other locations, and also in this place where the voids that they left are still visible. And so this piece is about that, about the void of the Stockbridge Muncie community in this landscape, but also about their presence and about the ways in which this land is unceded territory.
Thank you so much, Beatriz. What a powerful note to end this segment of our program on. And thank you so much for sharing so generously about your work. At this time, I would love to turn the floor over to Marcela, who will be in conversation with Postcommodity.
Thank you so much, Mary. And I would love to invite Kade and Cristóbal to turn on their camera. Perfect. I see them both. Hi, I'm sure you're all thinking about all these beautiful connections that exist between all the works, and I'm so happy to be in conversation with you and eventually dig and delve into these points of contact between all the works. But I wanted to start Postcommodity and to offer this thinking that that comes to mind whenever I think about your work, and is this beautiful shift in perspective that I see happening from colonial violence that we may experience on a daily basis to a different type of epistemology that's ideated on ancestral and indigenous knowledge. And I think one of those ideas, or the way in which we see this shift happening from colonial violence to another type of epistemology, I see it happening in a work like Quinay-Picovillas. Maybe I'm putting some Spanish phonetics in that pronunciation. But I see here a notion, a sense of healing, right? And I see that, when we talk about healing, it's usually in contrast to a harm, something that causes harm. And I think it's important to also name that harm. So I wanted to ask you, how do you see these two concepts playing in a work like this one?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Marcela. Just very briefly, I want to acknowledge our fellow artists on behalf of Postcommodity, Beatriz Cortez and Margarita Cabrera. It's a real honor to share this stage with you all. And thank you, Whitney, and thank you, US Latinx Forum. The thing that is really important, and we look at this piece, which is Quinay-Picovillas, which is a Cree word for the translation in English is snake meat. This title was provided by curator Gerald McMaster. This work is part of Postcommodity's 2021 solo exhibition at the Ramey Modern Museum in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan on Cree territory. And so, well, you know, to answer your question, while we acknowledge that there's harm, we also use this reality as a collective to encourage or propose thought leadership, even despite challenging realities. And so, you know, I think a core proposition as Postcommodity is to make a mark of assent, which is in active contrast to positioning ourselves as broken or damaged. And I think that this work really illustrates that intention. This work is comprised of 4 100-foot industrial boom debris booms, and these booms are used to corral like oil, like when there's an oil spill. They're also used to collect garbage and other chemicals. And one of the things that is really important is that the colors of these booms correspond to different types of threats that are in relationship or what is referred to as hazmat or hazardous materials. So we have red that is flammable, yellow that is radioactive, blue representing dangerous, and white poisonous. And then to the same point, while we have this sort of discourse of danger, of threat to indigenous peoples throughout the Americas, these are our shared medicine colors, and that they carry knowledge, purpose, and meaning throughout our hemisphere, and they connect us. And the reason why this comes together with the idea of snake meat is that these booms are hung to represent this, that the Americas has been chopped into 4 parts, and that each part represents an area of the colonial map of the Western Hemisphere. So we have South America and Central America and North America and all of the surrounding islands. And so what we really want to communicate and to wrap up the answer to your really important question is that even though like our hemisphere is represented today in this manner as these 4 pieces of meat, we still see that, you know, there's still a power there. And the reason why we're looking at the snake as an idea is that both Kade and I, me coming from a Mexican American background and New Mexico indigenous background with Genisaro and Pueblo people, and Kade being an enrolled citizen of the Cherokee Nation, we share the idea of this beast, this large snake. In Cherokee is referred to as Uktena, and in Mexican cultures and Chicano culture, it's Quetzalcoatl. And we are all riding together on the backs of this mythological beast. We're all communicating on the backs of this beast. And our message is that if we could just get over these borders, we in Postcommodity believe that there's a shared power in Native American and Latin American indigenous peoples, that there's a shared power that we can experience by overcoming the Genesis amnesias that have largely been instated by borders, and the ways that borders have in many ways caused us to forget our relationships, our trade relationships, our relations. And so I think that Kade and I are very much believe that and argue that the world might very well need such relationships for its survival? Thank you. Thank you so much for that excellent question, Marcela.
Kade, was there anything you want to add?
No, I think that was comprehensive and absolutely beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. So Kade, maybe if we can move to the next slide. This one, Dreams, Blessings, and Memory. This is a work that addresses destructive labor practices within the military agricultural complex. And, you know, as a curator, especially in a museum of American art, I try to be hyper aware of the ways museums can perpetrate further violences. And this work, I love it because it bears the specificity of the cost of farm workers in the San Joaquin Valley. But in its making, you turn the museum into a ceremonial site while going against the desire for visibility that museums rely on. In other words, there's so much about the making of the work that is not in it's not necessarily visible. So there's a kind of a defiant act in doing that. So can you speak about the work, it's making, all the layers basically that are part of this work?
I'll try to work my way backwards a little bit and just start immediately with the ceremonial aspect of the work that involves the museum staff and their labor and their time. As the staff fixes the material, which is charcoal, to the wall using a stenciling process, they have to record themselves on video and audio, praying and singing prayers that acknowledge our interconnectedness and venerate the land, and specifically pray for the UNESCO sites that we share between us, because that's often the demarcation internationally of our existence as people, as indigenous people. So it's an opportunity to where we can use ceremony as it's intended to be used. Ceremony is a pedagogical endeavor, and we bring that into the museum as a pedagogical endeavor for the institution, because it is institution resources that are being committed to this process. And oftentimes the curators are involved, board members are involved. So it's a process that goes much deeper than just us and one of the preps that is working on this. This is a group effort. So it's that shared experience. But the piece itself, which the translation into English is crop duster rising and falling, dropping chemical rainbows onto carrot fields, and Indian guide, flagging the aircraft for one more turn. So the substance of the poem is based, it's actually my father's story. And my father's Cherokee, and we're Oklahoma Indians. We're originally from Southeast Georgia, Tennessee, and so forth. But he came from Oklahoma to California, and he was working the fields like a lot of Oklahoma Indians would do, is migrate every year, work the fields. This was really common from the 20s to the 70s, and even to today. But he was flagging the crop duster, and he was poisoned and had to spend a few months in the hospital as a result. And he's lived the rest of his life with the health consequences of that experience. But the reason why I chose that the reason why we chose that story as something to develop into a piece, because that's a story we shared with each other. We share stories all the time, but how it becomes a post-commodity work is the positioning of it. The fact that this is something that is a shared history, not just with Cherokee people, but also indigenous people from south of the border. And this is in Nahuatl, the language here. And that's there are over 2 million indigenous people speaking this language. This is the most broadly spoken indigenous language in our hemisphere. And you hear this language in the fields in the San Joaquin Valley. And I wanted to honor that experience and to share and highlight that in a way that would be as relevant and powerful as possible. So while it was an experience that happened to my father, it's an experience that has happened to thousands of indigenous people working in the fields. So that's a real important aspect of the piece itself.
Thank you, Kade. And can we play the recording so that we listen to the beautiful poem? Try again.
Tlapahtisquetl momiaquilia tlen huetzi, quimahcahti tlen axcuali tlen cosemalotl. Panmili campa onca zanahorias uan imecayo masewali. Quiixnescayotia tepostototl ika seyok kawitl.
Thank you for playing that. And I just want to harken back to something Cristóbal said about we are all on the backs of this Uktena, and we're on the backs together also in the farms of the Central Valley. And it's just one very specific example that's very personal to us. It's a part of our history, our lived history, that we wanted to share in a way to a broader public.
Thank you, Kade. And yeah, I think you crystallize away in the ways in which, there's no maybe institution that's gonna recognize, acknowledge, celebrate the points of contact links in hemispheric indigeneity or global indigeneity, but you do it through this work. And that's the power of ceremony that you so beautifully named. So we have one more slide, and I love that this will be the last slide before we open it to the conversation between all of you. And here I wanted to invite specifically Cristóbal to talk about the work, because when I see it, I think of expansiveness, not in a manifest destiny way, I want to clarify, but something that surpasses its own container, meaning the architecture of Remé, of the museum, is almost around it, not that the sculpture was placed there. It's more like it looks like the architecture is happening around it. And so, scale also comes to mind. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about this, of what are the, what's the thinking that informs your choice of form, scale, and materials?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Marcela. I feel like your question was also a very beautiful read of the work. But very, very quickly, and I know that we're very close on time now, I just want to acknowledge Delfina de la Cruz and Ofelia Cruz Morales, who were our collaborators in the previous work that we looked at. They are two indigenous Nahuatl speakers from Oaxaca in Mexico. And that was a real honor to get to work with them, a really truly sacred honor for us to get to work with them on that work. This piece called South by North is also North by South. It also reflects back to the snake meat piece that we looked at earlier. Again, here we have hazmat colors and indigenous medicine colors. And one of the things we want to do is we wanted to hearken back to our shared indigenous structures. And a lot of times when we think about pyramids, we're thinking about what is currently referred to as Mesoamerica, but pyramids and pyramidal mounds existed throughout all of the Americas and in North America as well. And that's not something that we often acknowledge or that the public at large is even aware of. And we see that these common forms of expression represent the migration of knowledge. And I really love like Beatriz, like the migration of land, and there's the migration of knowledge as well. And so just to wrap this up, these barrels, which are containment barrels for hazardous waste, have been arranged in a way to reflect beating patterns that exist throughout our hemispheres. But they're also, it's the idea of thinking about the institution and its sort of colonial practice, which is like to contain knowledge, to represent knowledge. And that is in relationship to the metaphor of like containment of hazardous materials. And when we look at the like industry, we can see that industry has failed to contain hazardous materials. We're seeing the ongoing pollution of our natural water supply. It's really threatening our way of life among many other ecological challenges we face. But at the same time that we're dealing with this spillage, the museums are having to contend with their own lack of or failure to contain, which was very much a part of the colonial project. The idea that indigenous knowledges can circulate within and proliferate an institution, but they cannot be contained by an institution. They exist before, they're always becoming in the past, in the present, in the future. And that determination of always becoming is not contingent on a museum. And so here with this sculpture, you see the pyramid as if extending beyond the ceiling of the museum, extending beyond the floor and extending beyond the walls. And this work is like the previous slide is also referring to my father, who was also poisoned by industry. In my case, my father was exposed to nuclear fissile material and other toxins working at Los Alamos National Laboratory, and unfortunately passed away several years back due to his a little over 10 years battle with chronic lymphocytic leukemia. So we really wanted to tell the story of our fathers being poisoned, and to look at that, and to look at this metaphor of the hemisphere, like the idea that there's an irreconcilable tension or narrative conflict, these dual meanings, one harmful, one healing. And that to us is an act, to act as a complex and conflicting metaphor of the Americas. And I think that's certainly something that is worth meditating and reflecting on, because it's certainly something I believe we're going to have to overcome. And we and Kade have had many conversations around this idea. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And thank you both for sharing those stories about your fathers. And I think it in a planning meeting that we had, you mentioned, like, sure, there's grieving that can happen, but in a very true post-commodity fashion of having these stories be a mark of ascent. You're using the stories of your fathers to, put them in a museum, present them, and really branch out from those specific stories to things that might connect us, farm workers, to people working on the border, and also the hemispheric connections that we see here.
Oh, that's so important.
And now
Thank you. Thank you so much, Marcela. Thank you.
I would love to invite Beatriz and Margarita and Mary, and we have about 20 minutes left. So if this is your time, so we could put another question to the group, but if you guys feel and want to talk.
I think we need like an icebreaker. Margarita.
I can say something to you. Your comments, Cristóbal, you know, and the work that you're both doing is so compelling and so moving. And it just made me think about how, you know, we're working towards this healing and, you know, with our projects and with our work. And we're always coming across these moments of oppression. And, you know, the way that I somehow find to be able to move forward and continue to work against, you know, the systematic oppressions that exist and acts of violence, is that whenever there is an act of oppression, it's always an opportunity for a positive transformation. And it just, you know, you inspired me to think about that with all the comments that you were sharing. But I also want to just go ahead and say that I had a question for both of you. And I know that we both work at ASU, of course, and I understand this is the second time that we're presenting together. So I'm really honored, as well with Beatriz. But, you know, I'll say that teaching, I believe, is like art, right? And that we are creating this intentional dialogue and working from a place of vulnerability when we're teaching. And I just want to say that I always find that to be really, really moving when I see you working at the university platform, and you work with a lot of kindness and respect, and it's very awesome to see that. But for both of you, I want to ask about collaboration, both you and Clay. For me, collaboration is between supporting organizations, immigrant communities, academic communities, nonprofits, churches, civic organizations, consulates, et cetera, et cetera. So many people that I work with to make my works. With your collective, when there's two of you leading the way through many important decisions, can you share a little bit about the collective approach that you have found to work best so far for you?
Absolutely. You know, what I'd like to do is I'd like to hand the stage over to my collaborator, Kade, in honor of Kade being the co-founder of Postcommodity, and really came to me, and he founded the collective in 2007 and came to me along with our collaborators at that time with an invitation. And the invitation came with a very beautiful mission and set of intentions that I would then accept and work very hard to honor, support, and extend throughout the years. And I love listening to Kade speak on this, and then I will add to some of what he has to say. And thank you, Margarita.
You know, the collaborating in this collective environment was really about creating a learning community and to build power around ideas and to take on projects that perhaps are a little bit more complicated or a little bit more challenging than what any of us as individuals could do. So it was the idea that let's come together and make something that's greater than the sum of the individual parts. That was really, really important. So from day one, when we work together on every facet of the project, from the inception to revision to research to design to production to exhibition. It's always been a all hands on deck endeavor, and it's an endeavor that it's coming out of Phoenix, and Phoenix is a lot like, you could say it's a brown power center in the United States, very similar to how Atlanta is for Black people. And in Phoenix, there's this tradition that was established by Chicken Indio, a collective that was indigenous and Chicano artists working and collaborating together and providing a supportive infrastructure to build their practices from. And we wanted to bring that tradition into our work. That was something that was really important to Postcommodity as a collective. So we're very much a part of what Phoenix is and the traditions of that art community, for sure.
And, you know, one thing that I would really want to offer everyone about collaboration, and something that I'm so proud of, and there is a lot of this sort of presence of labor, right, that I think in many ways cuts across the works that we're showing here. And one of the things we learned very early on as a collective is that a driver, we really had to bring in like an indigenous way of being and knowing, and really model that in practice. We recognize that these sort of capitalist concepts of labor could really drive a wedge between all of us in the collective. So we sought to, I'd say in phase one, see ourselves as an interdisciplinary collective, and then move ourselves into a transdisciplinary collective. So we didn't want to have any like divisions of labor happen within the collective that were based on individuals' embodiments of various types of expertise. Because what that would mean is, like, if you have one artist who is really good at digital media and another artist that's really good at poetry, that those knowledges can be held in politically within a collective, and they could create asymmetries of power. So going back to what Kade was saying, we structured ourselves as a learning community, and we use every single work of art as an opportunity to teach each other the skill sets we bring to the table, moving into a more transdisciplinary approach. So we really embody, as individuals coming together as a collective, we really embody a shared knowledge. And we are always teaching each other and growing from that. And so we never instrumentalize each other to make a work of art. We use a work of art as an opportunity from which to build and strengthen our relationships with each other. And I think that is a real key to our success as a collective. And we're very proud because aspirationally, we don't always achieve it, but we work very hard to try to always honor the 4 R's, which you'll find in American Indian and Native American studies, which are respect, reciprocity, relationships, and responsibility. And we always try to radiate out from that center of these 4 R's. Thank you so much.
Can I want to piggyback on what you said, because I've heard, Beatriz, I've heard you speak about kind of and correct me if I'm wrong, but kind of an anti-disciplinarity. And we see it materially happening, and even in the works of the other artists of like Margarita, when you see the threads, you see these very soft sculptures, like, they're not supposed to be that, right? They're supposed to be rigid. But Beatriz, specifically in your work, which you spoke about this with Eric Booker on a talk for Storm King, so shout out to him. But when you're welding, you're not sanding down the themes, right? You're letting, and that people have told you, oh, this is not how it's supposed to be done. So there's something about an anti-disciplinarity that's very productive. And that in that unsuturing or unstitching or letting the seams be, you can see them. There is a suturing perhaps of histories of temporalities. So I don't know if that makes any sense,
Yeah.
but anything that you want to.
No, it's really important. I think that I want to kind of say in this conversation, say that sculptures are monumental and they don't exist as monumental sculptures in the same way that other monumental sculptures exist. They were made by the collaboration and through the collaboration and the empowerment of many peoples. In particular, of course, the artists that work with me by my side in my studio, Tatiana Guerrero, Philip Byrne, and Ricardo Rutia, but also the ancient knowledge that is embedded into it, the way in which we honor the labor of immigrants, and the way in which we honor how immigrants teach. We teach ourselves how to do things that we don't know how to do because we need jobs when we don't have other opportunities, etc. And so I think all those things are embedded, the labor is embedded into the work. And it's an effort, therefore, to remove these materials, steel or the plants or all the objects that we're inserting into a sculpture from industrialization, outside of industrialization, to other temporalities and back to being organic and back to the earth. And we do that through labor, through the labor of many, many others, but also by learning how ancient peoples did things, and by learning how abstract thought has happened throughout centuries, and how it has been generated by indigenous communities, even if we are taught in school that that abstraction comes from, you know, modernity, etc. And so I think that in many ways, these time travels and these messages that are carried by a sculpture also are inscribed on the surfaces by the labor of many. But so I wanted to say that and say thank you to them. They're here with me in this space. And I think that also when we say that a sculpture can carry the messages of many others, is because I've been fortunate to have so many teachers, my community here, my immigrant community in Los Angeles, but also many teachers in Central America. For example, I have collaborated for over 15 years with a Maya Cachiquel collective called Cajay. And together we have carried out many projects and written many things and thought together many things. And so all that knowledge is there. And I think it's beautiful because it has taught me to imagine disciplines as nationalism and other identities as things that can function in ways that just trap you into thinking or operating in a very specific way, and trying to get rid of that imposition is really important to me. So I try to stay away from nationalisms and try to imagine other temporalities instead. And I understand the importance of the visibility of identities, but I try to say, imagine what they were in other times, etc. And I think that's really important, and that's also part of the sculpture's collectivity. And so I'm really interested in that. But I wanted to throw in also a comment about the three presentations, that it was really beautiful to see the three presentations, how in spite of the difficult moment that this country is experiencing, in spite of the ways in which immigrants are still today being divided, the families are being divided, the borders still there, people are unable to reunite their families. There is no path to legalization for many immigrant communities, including specifically Salvadoran, Guatemalan, and Mexican immigrants today. How positive and full of generosity our approach to the border and to migration is. And that has been really beautiful to see. This idea of feeding each other, this idea of welcoming each other, empowering others through our work, etc. That we have heard today. It's really beautiful to think about how out of the darkness comes all this generosity. I don't know if the others would like to say a few words about that, but I would love to hear Margarita and you guys from Postcommodity say that something about generosity, because it's such an important presence to give a forum, open a space for others to speak through your work, etc.
Yes, I mean, I thank you for asking and mentioning the act of, you know, generosity. I think I also, with you, feel very grateful to all the people that I've worked with, and I really acknowledge my privilege and my place as a working artist, and I try to leverage my place to support my community, my immigrant communities, and so I am very, very grateful for the invisibility of, because we're talking about thousands of people that have been involved in the work that I've been a part of. And yeah, it goes without saying that it is an incredible act, to gift their time, their energy, their stories to these projects. I mean, I think at the end of the day, in the projects that I've been involved with, there's always a conversation about what we're trying to do collectively and how the collective creative energy, when supported and empowered, can move mountains, And even though there's a lot of resistance against that collective voice and that collective power, there's still this urge or willingness to work together to try to, take steps forward, right? With the acts, the creative acts that we're putting forward as communities. Even if we don't get as far as we hope, even if we set to accomplish 100%, but only reach 85%, just walking forward with this type of production means there's change and means, there's transformation. So I'm very honored by the fact that people are trusting of the art industry and myself as an artist. When we open up these platforms for these works to be possible, it's very humbling, and there's a lot of growth in that process for everybody involved. A lot of growth on my part too. So I, goes without saying that I'm more than grateful to everybody who's been a part of the works that I've created, and they wouldn't happen, without their participation.
And, from my perspective, generosity is at the core of redistributing power. And that is at the core of our worldview and how so many indigenous communities exist today and yesterday and tomorrow.
I feel very overwhelmed by joy, and that joy makes me feel like I could cry, and it does tie to the idea of generosity. I would say that we oftentimes the generosity is deep in our hearts, deep in the heart of Postcommodity. And I would also say it's also very much an aspiration. And sometimes we are able to transcend a great deal of obstacles and challenges that are very much within ourselves in order to reach greater heights of generosity. And so I want to thank you, Margarita, for your remarks, because sometimes you do get like 70% there. Sometimes you get 80%. Sometimes it's like, it really hits. And when it hits, that's when I like go back and I think, wow, okay, that's excellent. And I think it's only really hit, like really hit one time in Postcommodity's career, which is Repellent Fence, where that generosity just changed our being, where there was an immeasurable experience of or sense of dignity recovered. And so I feel like that's a central tenet of what it means to be a professor and an artist, is to demonstrate acts of generosity. And even when it's very difficult and painful to do so, like the pieces that Kade and I showed today, where these are pieces that required sacrifice for industry, so people could eat, or that people could power their homes, or people could feel a sense of safety, while at the same time within the specter of the military industrial complex. And so we just have to find a way, I feel like, in generosity, to make sure not to close ourselves off, because we may feel a sense of pain, but to remain open and self-implicate and recognize that the world is like super complicated. And I love like when I think about your work with the cacti, like the Border Patrol, a lot of people, for example, don't realize that the Border Patrol is one of the employees, like one of the largest percentages of Latinx people of all federal agencies. It's largely a brown agency. And if you go and you listen to their stories, it's really complex. And if we're open to each other's stories, we can start to model those systems. And it isn't until we model those systems without getting in the way of ourselves that we might be able to actually bring a level of criticality and openness to the things that we maintain and create in our world. And I think that's so important, so important. And I think that's something we as Indigenous peoples of the Americas can really offer our hemisphere.
Oh, what a poignant and truly moving note to close this conversation on. I know, and I think, many of our audience members too will be thinking about this conversation in the coming days, and and these themes and the ideas that you all have brought forward will be resonating, for a long time to come. And with that, I want to offer my sincere gratitude to Beatriz, Margarita, and Postcommodity for a stimulating, generative, and generous conversation. We would also like to thank Michelle Ruiz and the team at USLAF. Our deepest gratitude also goes to the person running the show behind the scenes, Andy Hawks, Coordinator of Public Programs, and to Megan Ewer, Director of Public Programs at the Whitney. A big thank you to Colectivo Babia, Cristóbal and Pau for their interpretation, and to Christina Jensen for live captioning. And last but not least, thank you Ford Foundation and the Mellon Foundation for supporting the work of Latinx artists and workers. Our next event in the series will be on November 15th in conjunction with the National Museum of Mexican Art. Be sure to follow us on social media and subscribe to our newsletter at uslaf.org for updates on how to register. Have a great day, everyone, and thank you so much for tuning in.